Hello everyone, time for chapter 13, back to London. In the summer of 1944, my sister and I returned to London for what I thought was to be our summer holiday, but it turned out that my parents had different ideas. Although the V-2 rockets were still falling regularly on the city, the worst bombing raids had almost stopped, so our parents decided to keep us at home and to send us both to the convent of Jesus and Mary in Willesden. My sister was old enough to go to secondary school by now, and if we had returned to Ross, she would have had to continue at the village school at Brampton Abbot until she was 15 years old, unless the war ended before then, as George Green's school no longer had a secondary class for her to join. Some years beforehand, I had passed the entrance examination to the convent, which meant that my sister could also join the school as a paying pupil so long as I was studying there too. If Hazel was staying in London, I would be staying as well. I was very sad as I was beginning to study for my examinations, and now I had to start all over again in a school where I did not know anyone. Life was difficult in London. Sometimes there was a horrible smog, like a thick yellow fog caused by coal fires burning. It got into your throat, choking you, and you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. It was so dirty everywhere, and we were not allowed to use more than 5 inches of water in our baths. Some people painted a line around the inside of their baths so they could see that they did not go over the limit. We even had to share bath water. The smallest member of the family would have their bath first, and the others would take their turns afterwards. I thought it was much nicer bathing in the tin bath in front of the fire at the Warrens' house. Everywhere, lawns and flower beds were dug up to plant vegetables so people could eat healthily. This was called Dig for Victory. Iron railings around gardens and parks were all taken away to be melted down to use as the outer covering for shells and munitions. At home, the top flat was being rented out, and the couple who lived there shared the Morrison Shelter in our living room with our parents when the air raid sirens shouted. Morrison Shelters had replaced Anderson Shelters. They were made of steel with open steel mesh sides and were bolted to the floor of a room. The top was like a heavy table and as a desk where we did our homework. There wasn't room for me and my brother and sister in the Morrison Shelter, because it was still dangerous in London. We had to sleep in a reinforced coal bunker outside the living room window. My father had put sacks full of earth and covered with tar on the roof of the coal bunker to strengthen it. Inside, he had built 2 bunks, one for my sister and one for my brother. I slept on a mattress on the floor beside the bunks. Every night, we went to bed in our own beds at exactly 6 o'clock and often fell asleep until the air raid siren sounded. And then we moved into the coal bunker, hoping we would be safer there if a bomb fell on our home. An ack-ack gun went along the railway line every night, shooting at the planes passing overhead. Kensal Rise station was close by our house, and the gun made a terrible noise. We would be terrified until it had gone further up the line and we could hear it going into the distance. We were so glad when the all clear sounded after the planes had flown back to Germany. The planes were Heinkel bombers, and their engines had a low throbbing sound which we always recognised. Sometimes a returning German plane would shoot at the streets below, and we would hear the bullets hitting the tarred roof above us, but we never came to any harm. Even so, I was made well aware that I was the eldest child and therefore responsible for my younger siblings, so I tried my hardest not to show them when I was feeling scared. Once we knew it was safe, we would go indoors to get dressed and have our breakfast. People came out from the underground stations where they had been sleeping and went back home or to work. The buses began to run again, and we would catch a number 6 bus and head off to school. The bus took us to the top of the road that the convent was on, and then we walked from there. There's a big bike outside. I think that bike might need to go to the garage. Towards the end of the war, if an air raid had been on for a long time with no activity, people would try to carry on with their daily lives as best as possible, even though the all clear hadn't been given. This meant that buses would occasionally run during air raids. One lunchtime we were left in the cellar at school for some hours after the air raid siren had sounded. We normally went home during the lunch hour, but on this occasion lunch was long since over and we were beginning to feel hungry. Although the all clear had not sounded, very foolishly I suggested to my sister that as we couldn't hear anything outside, we could hurry and try to catch a bus home. Fortunately, A number 6 bus just arrived as we got to the bus stop. But once we got to the top of the rise, the drone of a doodlebug could be heard overhead. Doodlebugs were flying bombs that were first launched from the ground towards Britain in early June 1944. They were called doodlebugs or buzz bombs because of the odd sound they made. They kept going until they ran out of fuel before the sound stopped, and then they fell to the ground and exploded. Nobody knew where they would fall out of the sky, and they killed many people. So when we all heard the dreaded drone overhead, the bus conductor tried to get us to go into the railway shelter with the other passengers, but I pulled away. Taking my sister's hand, we ran as fast as we could the few yards to my father's shop. The front was open, so we tore through and threw ourselves into the Morrison Shelter in the living room where my parents were sheltering. The bomb fell onto the bus and destroyed it, so we were very lucky. I never took a chance like that again. Even without taking chances, you never knew what was around the corner. One day I was sitting on the bus going home from school. It stopped at what had been the end of a road to let a small girl get off. The whole road had been demolished by a bomb, and it was a terrible sight. The bus conductor got off and waited with the little girl until some people who were digging into the rubble ran up the road and collected her. For the rest of my journey home, I wondered if the bomb had destroyed my home and if my family was safe, but happily my street was still intact. Later on, when I passed my exams, I joined the Maria Gray High School for Girls at Brondesbury so I could study physics and chemistry, which were 2 subjects not taught at the convent. I also took art to have a good art department. The school wasn't far away on a bicycle, so I stopped going on the bus. One night, a V2 rocket demolished a wing of the high school building. When we arrived at school the next day, the art class was sent to paint the damage. I decided I'd keep the painting forever as a reminder of the war. After these frightening experiences in London, I asked my mother if Hazel and I could return to the Warrens and Graytree on Ross-on-Wye, but Mother said that as I had left George Green School and we were now pupils at the convent and the high school, it would not be a good idea. Mother felt sure that the war would soon be over, and I certainly hoped so. I would never feel safe living back in London until peace was declared. One more chapter to go. We'll read it tomorrow. Thanks for listening.